Hey everybody, welcome back to Mixing Music Analog and mixingmusicanalog.com, and here on our YouTube channel. And this time out, we have someone else here in the room with us. Dave's back.
Hey guys.
And we're going to do a couple of videos today. We're gonna focus primarily today on the SSL Fusion. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're really going to focus on the hardware. We're going to listen to it on some drum loops. We're going to listen to it on a full mix, and we're going to go through each one of the sections of the SSL Fusion. We're going to break out the manual and we're going to describe to you what each of the controls do. We're going to take them in and out as one separate module so you can hear the effect of what that does. And then we're going to listen to all of the modules in at the same time and take the whole hardware in and out of the circuit so you can hear what that does. And then in a follow-up video, we are actually going to compare the hardware to the SSL Fusion plugins as well. So we're going to have two, it's going to be SSL Fusion.
It's SSL day, guys.
It's an SSL Fusion party today.
Yep.
So before we get into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you know when we're posting new content, and also go out to mixingmusicanalog.com and check out what I have going on over there. And also make sure you check out Dave's links in the description box. He has links for his mixing and mastering services, which will be in the description box, as well as his YouTube channel and an Instagram.
Yep,
and an Instagram page as well. So make sure you check out all the links in the description box and go support what he's doing as well. So here we are in front of the console. So let me just tell you quickly how we have things routed. So on the screen, I'm sure Studio One will come up. We have two tracks. We have a drum loop that just came out of a Superior Drummer, nice little drum groove, so we can hear that. That is being routed down to two channels here on the console. With the high pass filter and all the EQ and everything bypassed. There's nothing coming in. It's just whatever comes out of Studio One is coming directly here unaffected. Then we also have a full mix of a track called Going Down by Barry Diger. We've used that on the channel before. We've used it at mixingmadeeasy.net. It's a full mix that I did several months ago. That mix has been printed back into the DAW here. Now this mix actually doesn't have the Fusion on it. This was done when I did it for mixingmadeeasy.net, so it wasn't done analog. This was done in the box, this particular version of Going Down, just so you know. So the SSL Fusion wasn't already baked into this version of it.
Is that your stock plugin mix too?
That is the stock plugin mix, right? So the only thing that happened with this Going Down mix is we did it all with stock plugins, no other fancy processing, just a typical mix, right?
So this is a very straightforward mix then.
Straightforward with minimal amounts of processing. It's basically mostly EQ. A little bit of bus compression, but mostly EQ. That's coming down to two more channels here on the board. Again, high pass filter, EQ, everything is flat, everything is bypassed. All of that is going to our SSL Fusion, which we're going to talk about. And we have bypassed the SSL bus compressor just so you could hear the Fusion and what it does. So that's what we have going on. So first thing we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on the drum loop. We'll start with that. We'll make a little loop here. There we go. And we will turn the cycle on. There we go. And so we're going to start with the Fusion itself. There's a camera over here. We'll bring it up on the screen. Dave will show you the Fusion. We're going to walk through the controls. And then with the help of the manual, Dave's going to talk about a little bit what each of the controls do. And we're going to start with the first section. So take it away, Dave. What do we got with this Fusion going on?
Well, the Fusion is different modules all into one unit. And it's mainly intended for mixed bus processing. It can be used for other things, but it's mainly made for a mixed bus type of processing. So from left to right, you have your input trim knob. There's a high pass filter, which goes from off. It goes 30, 40, or 50 hertz. This next module here is your vintage drive section. You can take each section in and out individually. You have a drive control and a density control, and then there's an LED for activation that also will go from green, yellow to red depending on your signal strength, right? Your next one over is your violet EQ, which is basically, I would call this a Baxendale style EQ. It's a low shelf, high shelf. I don't know if it's peaking or shelf. We'll have to look that up. I think it's shelf, but it may be peaking. But the low is switchable from 30, 50 to 70 to 90 hertz, and then the high shelf is 8K, 12K, 16K, or 20K. Then the next one over is a high frequency compressor, just a high frequency. It's not a full spectrum compressor. Threshold and crossover, again, with an LED for signal strength. And then the last one here is the stereo image with a space and a width knob. And then down here, this button right here brings in and out the extra transformer, okay? So then you got your output trim. It also has an insert point on the back where you can actually plug other hardware into this unit and insert in and out. And then you can choose whether or not to have the insert pre or post EQ, and then your bypass knob on the end and your LED stack for your meter. So, there's actually a lot, very few knobs, they're getting a lot done.
Yeah, there's a lot going in here. It's mostly like a finisher. But before I forget, what we're going to do is I will timestamp all the different sections of this video because this will be a longer video. We want to try to do something different than what really is done on YouTube. There's lots of videos of this on YouTube. This is going to be a longer video, but we really want to walk you through all of it. So I'll timestamp things below in the description box. Have no fear. So why don't we start off with the first section, which is what we have you
have your vintage drive section. There is the high pass filter. We're probably not going to do too much with because we're using it full mix.
Yeah, you could show them how it works. We'll twist the knob, but really it's this high pass filter. So here's our drum loop that we're kind of starting with. This just came out of Superior Drummer 3. It's just a basic loop. It already sounds good on its own. But here is our drum loop so you can kind of hear what this does. And that's pretty much what it's going to do. It's just going to loop around itself. So let's start with the high pass filter. Let's just go through the different, if you just want to tweak, every couple of seconds, tweak it up just so you can hear what that's kind of doing here. And then we're just going to kind of conversate and talk about what we're hearing and give you guys our opinions on what we think about this SSL Fusion. So here we go.
High pass filter is off. That's at 30. That's at 40. You're basically going to hear that on the kick. And that's 50. Especially on 50, you can hear that the low end is pretty much controlled on the kick. I mean, it's not gone, but it's definitely rolled off. So I'm just going to take that back out, okay? So you want to grab that manual, David? Get into the vintage drive section.
So that's the high pass filter. And what we'll try to do is we won't talk during the playback because I'm going to have to lower our vocals anyway. So when we're talking about what we're hearing, we want to stop the DAW.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically the high pass filter is just that. It's rolling off the low ends. You could hear it as we start to turn it up. The kick drum tends to go away a little bit. That's kind of what it does. If you're putting it on a full mix, which we'll demonstrate in a bit, it's going to roll off some of the bass guitar as well. So now we're going to go to the vintage drive and let's talk a little bit about what the vintage drive does for people that don't know. So basically it's a saturator. It's a simple saturating module here. Let me just get over to where it is, if I can find it. Okay, here we go. So
editing.
That's cool. Okay, so the vintage drive really has two controls, right, Dave? So what are the two controls on our vintage drive?
You have a drive control and a density control.
Okay, so the drive control is going to, obviously, the more you turn up the drive control, the more signal you're pushing into this saturator. You can increase it just by turning it up clockwise. So you can go from 1, and I think it goes up to number 11 on the unit itself. So the more you push in, the harder it's going to go. It's got an LED light that's going to kind of flicker as you push more into that circuit. And when they recommend that you it's going from like a green, when it's flickering green and occasionally hitting the orange, it's going to give you kind of a nice subtle effect, which is good for like most applications, especially with full mixes. But as you push it harder, more into the yellow or orange into the red, you're going to hear more of that saturation. So we're going to play back this drum loop and Dave's just going to start slowly, just kind of cranking it up and cranking it back. And then we'll talk about the density pot here in a second. So let's listen to what the drive knob does.
Definitely gets furry. Definitely gets furry. And that LED went full red when it got that furry too. So.
Okay, so you can hear as we turn up that and it gets more into the red, we can absolutely hear, and I'm sure you can hear it over YouTube, it gets more distorted, more saturated. That's what it's going to do. So in most applications, you're usually keeping it around that in the green section there, flickering into the orange. Now the density pot, what that does, is it at lower settings, it's going to produce additional harmonics with emphasis towards even order harmonics. So the lower, anything below 3, you're going to be dealing with even order harmonics. The density between 2 and 3 can help add richness to a mix. Medium to higher density settings above the value of 3 on the knob is going to it's going to gradually lower the overall harmonic content, but with more odd order harmonics. So basically, you know, between even order harmonics, odd order harmonics, say that 3 times fast. To not get too technical here, the more you turn up that density, it's going to kind of shape the sound of the saturation a little bit, and you really just use it to taste. Anything below a value of 2 or 3 is, again, going to be more subtle in where we would typically use it in most applications. As you start to turn that thing more clockwise and go higher values, it's just going to change the sound of the saturation a little bit. So anything between like 3 or 6 on the dial is really going to add some thickness to a mix or to a drum loop here. So why don't we play with the density a little bit?
Well, yeah, we got to set the drive and then put the density in.
Yeah, set the drive and then put the density in. So here we go.
So that drive is on 5 right there. We're going to leave it right there because that's giving you a nice... Here comes the density. Definitely pushes your level. Density right there is on about 2.5.
Okay, so now we got the density. We heard it turn all the way up, all the way down. What we hear in the room here is as you turn up that density, it gets a little bit thicker in the low ends, which is what the manual kind of says, but it also is going to increase the overall volume. So as you adjust this vintage drive, then you're going to want to turn down the output of the Fusion to kind of level match it. So now that he has it kind of set to where it sounds pretty good, he's going to level match the output, and then we'll just take the circuit in and out so you can hear just what the vintage drive is doing to this drum loop. So here we go.
That definitely kicks it. Yeah. That's in. Yeah, it's definitely level match, but you can definitely hear that, you know, the high end pops.
Yeah, say that again.
Lot.
Yeah, say that again. So yeah, it's definitely, it's more level match now, but what are you hearing on that?
I'm hearing like when you kick it in the high end, the upper end definitely has a lot more pop to it.
Right.
You know?
Right. It definitely gets a little bit more crack. It's a little bit more hair on the snare. It just, again, it's subtle. What I like about the Fusion in general is it's pretty subtle. It's not overly hyped. I mean, you can get kind of aggressive with it, but a little goes a long way with this unit.
Yeah.
So that's the vintage drive. So now let's talk about the Violet they don't call it the Violet EQ, but the EQ.
Yeah, it is Violet EQ.
Oh, Violet, that's what they call it, the Violet EQ. So
Yeah.
we're going to take the saturation circuit out. We're just going to talk about the EQ. EQ is pretty self-explanatory. Go ahead, Dave. Tell them what we got on the EQ.
Well, again, it's a low frequency, high frequency. Does it say shelving or peaking?
I believe it's a shelving EQ,
Okay, so it's kind of like a Baxendall style EQ shelving. The low shelf goes from 30 to 50 to 70 to 90. The top shelf is 8K, 12K, 16K, or 20K, and you have plus or minus 9 on the knobs.
Right. So you're looking at the manual is definitely, you'll see it's a shelving EQ.
Yeah. Okay. So she's a shelving EQ.
Right.
So you can use this to dial in a mix, or you can use it just as like a smiley face EQ. You know, in general, however you like to set your master EQ.
Right.
You know?
So I usually will typically put a little bit of bottom at about 50, maybe a couple of dB, and a little bit of top at a 12 or 16K. That's typically how I use it. But like he said, you can tweak it in. So we're going to start with, let's start with the low ends, and we'll play back these drums and tweak the low ends.
All the way up. 30 hertz. That's 50. That's 90. Gets a little bit thick at 90. Yeah, 50 does nice on the kick.
Yeah, so on the kick, 50 hertz is about the sweet spot with this, but as he turns it up, it gets in here nice and tight and really boomy. It's pretty substantial if you turn it all the way up. So let's work with the top end now. Let's see what that sounds like.
Okay. All the way down. That's minus. That's 8K. See, that's definitely a little bit harsh. Back to 0 or 12. 16. And 20. So if you go to like 16, that's not bad.
That's not bad. Okay, so we're what, 16K there?
Yeah, I'm at 16K plus 3, and then I have 50 hertz at plus 4.
Okay, 50 hertz plus 4, 16K plus 3. Let's just take the whole circuit in and out. So this is just the EQ, no drive. Here we go. Yeah, sounds good, right? Little bottom, little top. Sounds really good. Okay, cool. So let's go over to the high frequency compressor. Now the high frequency compressor is unique, and it's really good for things like taming cymbals and stuff. It basically compresses the high end frequency. So we have two controls on that. We have a threshold and an X and a crossover. The threshold is like any other typical threshold, right? The more you turn down the threshold, the quicker it's going to kind of kick in. The crossover point, let's see, determines the frequencies that are affected by the compression. So there you go. So on typical compressor parameters such as attack, release, and ratio are all fixed under the hood. So there's no attack, no release, no ratio. It's just the frequency point, the crossover point, and the threshold. At what point does it start compressing? So go ahead and let's see. Does it have frequency? Yes, it does. This is frequencies on there, right? So what's the frequencies on the crossover there, Dave?
On the crossover, it's basically
3K up to what, 20?
Yeah, 3K to 20K.
Okay, so 3K up to 20K. So what it'll do is, and again, we'll start around that 3K mark, and now you have the LED there as well, that once the LED starts kicking in, you'll start to see kind of the amount of compression, as it were, or the intensity of the compression. So why don't we start at 3K and then dial the threshold and then just start turning the frequency knob up, and let's see how it affects things. Okay. So here we go.
Pretty much got it. That's about 8 or 9. It's about 8.5K right there.
So what I hear on that, on the snare in particular, is when you bring in that high frequency compressor, the snare, because you have it set it right around 8K, the snare is a little less bright. It is kind of controlling, and it's taming down the 8K frequency, so the snare isn't as bright. Now, one good trick, or one way we can test this even further, is if you turn on the violet EQ and give me a little top end, and then turn on the high frequency compressor, we'll start to hear more of an effect there. So now he's got the violet EQ back in, and what do you have the high frequency portion set at?
It's at 8K.
No, on the violet EQ.
On the violet EQ, we're at 16K plus 3.
So give a little bit more on the 16K side.
So we'll go to
And turn
plus-
it down to maybe 12 or 12K or whatever.
Put it down to 12K, and I got it at +4.
There you go. And now we'll use the high frequency compressor and you should hear a more drastic difference. So here we go.
In.
Right, so without that high frequency compressor, you could hear how much brighter it is because we boosted up the EQ prior to the compressor. The compressor really grabs that down. So this is something that you can, if you wanted to put a little bit more top end in your mixing, you typically would, and then you wanted to just kind of control it a little bit. The high frequency compressor works good in that application. The other thing it can do is if you have a drum kit that's a really splashy, really harsh sounding cymbals, that will help. It also is really good if you have a sibilant vocal. This will help kind of control the sibilant vocal a little bit if you're getting a little bit too much sibilance popping through every now and again. So it's a simple compressor, but it's effective, right?
Yeah.
Sounds good, right?
Yeah, it's
What do you
good.
think?
It does. It's not overly aggressive on it. It's just shaving a little bit off of it.
Right, just doing a light
Yeah.
amount of shaving. It's just a nice way to tweak it in, and again, use it in a subtle way. Anything that kind of sneaks up and gets a little bit too out of control, it's just going to kind of tap it down, which is great.
Yep.
So now let's go to the stereo imager, right? Is that what's next?
You have stereo imager next. You have a space and a width knob on.
Okay,
that.
so on the stereo imager, it's basically what it says. It's going to widen the mix. So the width knob is pretty straightforward. The more you turn it up, the wider the mix is going to sound. The space knob control, or the space control, allows you to experiment with a broad boost or cut of bass frequencies in the side signal. And this feature is based upon the often overlooked but quite brilliant stereo shuffling process technique. So basically what the space is going to do is it is going to boost or cut the lower frequencies in the sides of the mix, right? So that's basically what it's going to do. So it recommends here that a space setting beyond 4 dB on whole mixes may be too extreme. So try between 2 dB and 4 dB to start. So the space being more on the lower, on the conservative side of it. And then we can use the width knob to show you how it spreads out the mix on this drum loop. So let's do that.
Start with the width, and then I'll do the space.
Okay, here we go.
This is decreasing the width, and this is 0. That's full. Back that down to about halfway and start with the space. This is space going down. That's the space neutral. Yeah. That's the space at 3. The width is at 3.
So what I hear there, especially on the space knob, what I'm hearing, I don't know what you're hearing, Dave, is I'm hearing the low end of the snare. As soon as you start cranking up that space knob, we hear a lot more of the low end of the snare get a little bit wider. Because
Yeah.
we're only talking about a drum loop here. On a full mix,
It's going to be way
we're going to
bigger.
reset it differently. That's why we wanted to do it on 2 different sound sources. On the width, you can hear it just gets wider. It gets a little bit more narrow, depending on how much of it you give. I mean, it gives a nice little width to the mix. It doesn't sound too wide, too overhyped, but it definitely gives it a little bit of width.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'm hearing it. Well, I'm over on the side, so I'm not hearing the width as much. But when the space knob went more than halfway up, it got really bottom heavy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to the point where it was starting to flub out. You know.
Yep.
So like I said, I backed the space off all the way back down to 3, and I mean, you can definitely still feel that bottom end kicking in, but we need to do a switch in and out.
Yeah,
on
let's do a switch in and out. So we could just, now he set it kind of where he thinks it sounds good. Let's just take it in and out so you hear what the stereo image module of this is doing.
You hear that bottom a lot. That's good. That's good, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds really good, I think, in here. It's just, you can hear it lift up and just push out a little bit in the speakers, so it's really effective. So now the last section of this is the transformer, which is a simple push button, right? It's just a simple push button. And basically, there's an output transformer that the more signal you push into this thing, the more you're going to hear the transformer. It's going to add a little bit of total harmonic distortion. Again, it's going to be super subtle. There's not much to say about it other than we're just going to turn it in and out, take it in and out so you can hear the difference. So keep your eye on the camera there and keep your eye on the power button. You'll see them activate it and deactivate the transformer. Here we go.
Subtle, but it's there.
Yeah, so it's very subtle. The one thing about this unit, the transformer thing out of all the things of this unit was my least favorite. It only because for me, it's a little too subtle. I'm used to the West Audio NG bus compressor, which has an iron transformer circuit, which is way more obvious. But there is definitely, I mean, I could definitely hear, sitting in the sweet spot here, I could definitely hear when he takes it in and out, but it is awfully subtle.
Yeah, it's even audible over here, though.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the same thing as we've always said about hardware. It just seems to add a little more dimension to the sound. It's not jumping. It's not a jump out of the speakers effect, but it's just a little bit of it's a little bit more, depth to it. That's it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, no, it definitely works. So now that we got that set up, now we're going to bring all the modules in and we'll play this back. We'll let him tweak it a little bit because now that we're bringing them all in, he may have to fine tune it, level match the output trans part of it. And then we'll take the whole unit in and out because there's the bypass button on the unit to take the whole unit in and out of the circuit. And then you can hear what the overall effect is on this. So here we go. You got to set pretty subtly, yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it's a little subtle. It gets a little bit wider. It's certainly, I can hear a little bit of the saturation. You could definitely hear where it comes in and where it comes out. So now what we'll do quickly is, Dave, let's switch chairs. Let Dave get in the sweet spot so he can hear it. I'll bypass it there and maybe tweak it a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll go then to the full mix so you could hear what it does on a fully mixed song. So why don't we switch chairs? Yeah, okay. And then you could hear it there and you could tell me what you hear, because it's a little difficult when you're sitting off to the side here. So just hit the space bar.
There just seems to be just a little bit of crunch on the kick coming from somewhere, but I mean, it
could be in the low end too. We had the low end boosted up quite a bit, so I turned down the low end a little bit.
But yeah, other than the little bit of crunch on the kick, when it comes in, it just gets a little bit deeper, a little bit wider, and definitely you can hear the scoopiness of the EQ coming in. You know what I mean? Which is exactly what you want on a drum track anyway, is you want that mid-range scoop, just a touch, and it's very subtle.
Right, hit it again. Let me take out some of the vintage drive. Let me tweak the drive a little.
It might be a little too wide for my taste.
Yep, I turned it all the way up just so they
Yeah.
could hear it over YouTube.
Yeah.
But also what I did there to reduce some of the a little bit of the kick thing you were talking about is I just dialed back a little bit of the vintage drive.
Yeah.
And then I also put the high pass filter at 30 hertz. When you put it up to 40, it takes a little bit of the bottom end away.
Yep.
But yeah, the width is all the way up. If I turn the width back maybe, 25%, and now you play it, you can hear the difference.
It gives it just enough space that way.
Yeah,
You know
right.
what I mean? Just enough space that, like I said, like when it's out, it's just basically here. And when you put it in, it just kind of it just goes a little bit like that.
Right.
And like I said, you definitely get a little more definition on the kick and snare when it comes in, a little bit more space and width, and you can also hear the room sound a little bit more when you put it in.
Right.
So,
we put the whole unit in.
Yeah, when you put the whole unit, you get a little bit more room sound to it. But yeah, it's very subtle. In the speakers, it's an obvious thing.
Yeah.
It is an obvious thing in the speakers.
Yeah, when you sit in the sweet spot, you could definitely hear the width. I mean, I hear it here, but I heard it definitely more sitting where you're sitting, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So that is on our drum loop. So now if we let's switch again. Let me put up the other mix, and we'll now listen to it on a full mix, right? So now we're not going to go through the controls again. You already know what the controls do. So what I'm going to do is take those out, put those in. We're going to probably have to tweak this a little bit. So again, this is Going Down by Barry Dreiger. This is a country rock tune, pretty much. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to play it back. Going to let Dave tweak in each one of the modules there, and then we're going to take the whole unit in and out so you can just hear it. You don't need to hear it on each individual module, I wouldn't think, again, at this point.
Yeah.
And then we can just hear the overall effect on a full mix. Now, again, this mix done with stock plugins. There was no SSL Fusion plugins or anything on this. It was just basically EQ and compression. And if I remember this mix correctly, Dave, is probably a master bus compressor.
Yes.
Probably hitting it a little bit. So this is, it wasn't mixed on the console is what I'm saying. So you're not hearing anything that was done to the console, except now that we're running the stereo mix through a pair of faders. That's it. So here we go. So here's this tune going down.
I'm going down, Lord, I'm going fast. This broken heart ain't gonna last. I would turn it around, but I can't get up. I'm going down, down on my luck. I'm going down, Lord, I'm going fast. This broken heart ain't gonna last. I would turn it around, but I can't get up. I'm going down, down on my luck. And when I'm busy battling up and I just can't keep up, just to keep it straight and true, it's all that I can do. I can't keep up.
Yeah, so even there now this is why I did this on a drum loop first, because I knew this would be the case. It's even more subtle on a full mix. It's not as obvious to me, even though I can see some of his settings are a little more on the aggressive side. It's still not as obvious. The drum loop, you go, oh wow, there it is. Here, it's there. I can hear it spread out a little bit. I hear it get a little bit crunchier, but it's a lot more subtle. So when you're listening back to this over YouTube, pay attention to things that are transient. Like the snare is where you tend to hear it a little bit. And also the guitars will spread out a little bit more when he brings the unit in because of the stereo width. You'll hear the guitars jump out a little bit further.
I was going to say that it seems to be way more reactive to high transient material. So when you have just the drum loop, which is all high transient material, it's way more reactive to that.
Right.
So when you bring in a full mix, which is, the transients are there, but they're also buried in with everything else.
Yeah.
The unit itself is just not reacting as aggressively to what's being fed into it.
Right.
So
Now maybe what we can, let's keep it, just take it all in and out. And then what we'll do is we'll stop it, we'll pause, and then he'll take out each one of the modules. Separate. Okay, so here will still be the whole unit.
Girl, you know I tried that too. Hands I built to hold are all too far a few. And when it comes to bad luck, any luck will do. Don't call me Mr. Lucky, call me Mr. Blue going down. Hey Lord, I'm going fast.
that's bypass. That's all out.
It's obvious. I mean, it's more subtle than the drum loop, but it's certainly something that you can absolutely hear. You can absolutely hear it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like I said, it is a subtle thing. Like I said, being outside of the sweet spot, I'm not hearing the width as much. But what I'm really hearing over here is the EQ changes, and especially the saturator, because I kick the saturator up a little more aggressive.
Yeah. You're hitting in the
because I'm a saturation junkie. But you can definitely, it's definitely, I think, a way more polished sound with it in than with it out. And also, too, I think on the full mix, to me, the transformer has more of an effect now.
Yeah.
On the full mix than it did on just the loop. And also, I got the high frequency compressor all the way up to 10K now. Okay, because it just kept getting a little bit too muffled for me. So I kept pushing it up. So I've got that up around 10K. I've got the 16K boost at +3. I've got the low at +1 at 50. The low on that is fine.
Yeah, there's a lot of low end in the mix already. I mean, there's already a lot of low end in this mix.
Oh, and I did put the high pass back in at 30 too. 30. So, like I said, I mean, like I tend to push things a little harder on the master bus, I think, than you do. Yep. But, like I also like to hear the effect of what I'm doing. Yeah. So like I said, it has an effect. It's like I said, anybody who's looking for like a Smashbox kind of effect, you're not gonna get it out of a Fusion. Yeah. It's like you say, it's like this is the last 10% of your mix.
Yeah, I mean you can be aggressive with it, but it's more. I classify this thing as more of like a finisher. It's just like a nice little finisher on the top. Where, it doesn't have, you can add a little bit of saturation, a little bit of high end or low end EQ, and it's not something that's gonna really, you're not really gonna cook things too heavily with this. You could, but it's not that. It's a much more subtle kind of a finishing piece, but it's unique,
If you push the drive up, if you push the high frequency, I mean, if you push all this stuff hard, it's gonna have a huge effect.
Yeah, but it seems
it's
like
not going to sound good.
Yeah, it seems to make the mix fall apart, especially with the vintage drive. To me, is a cool thing, but I think once you get beyond subtle, for me, it's too much, and I could hear it way too obvious. So yeah, but you can destroy the thing, but then it's like, well,
Yeah, what's the point of having it on there too?
Yeah.
If you're gonna crap all over your mix with the thing, there's no
Right.
point in having. And yeah, this thing, if you push this thing hard, is definitely going to have a way more in your face effect.
Yeah.
But if you have a very, very flat, lifeless mix, you can push this thing harder and
Yeah.
get it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
especially like if you were in a mastering situation.
Yeah, good mastering. This would be good for mastering too. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you were in a mastering situation and you had a mix that was kind of flat and lifeless, you could definitely push this thing hard to get, more out of it.
A little more mojo.
But you're also
Yeah.
then going to have to be doing a lot of EQ work.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I mean, the way we typically use this, it always sits on the master bus, and we mix into it. We don't turn it on afterwards. And typically we set it up for mild settings, and then as the mix progresses, depending on the track, we may get a little more or less aggressive with it. But usually it's a pretty almost set it, for me, it's almost a kind of set it and forget it with a minor amount of tweaking typically, because we're mixing into it most of the time, not most of the time, all of the time.
Yeah.
Right, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So now, how does it compare to plugins? Well, you'll have to stay tuned for the next video, because the next video, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're gonna run this and then run another set of tracks out with just the plugins, so we can hear what the difference is between the plugins and the hardware, if there is any, and talk about some of the differences in the plugins, because some of the plugins have a few more controls on them than the hardware does in some of the modules. So we'll talk all through that for the next video. So overall, hopefully, people, you found this helpful, and you got, you can hear the differences here. It's a nice unit. I think it's about $3,000 right now, $2,800 for that unit. Yeah. So that's about what it is. But if you look at other products in the same category, and there's really nothing else out there that's exactly the same as this. But when you look at other types of units that have like an EQ in it with some saturation or a transformer circuit or whatnot, you're in that $3,000 to $4,000 mark. I mean, you're not finding
Neve,
much cheaper than that.
What is it? The Neve Portico is probably the most comparable unit to it.
Yeah, that's even a little different.
And
but
that's over $5,000 now.
Is it over 5?
It's over 5.
Yeah.
Now.
So the Neve Portico 2 has a compressor and EQ in it, a kind of a saturation tape emulation circuit, I believe.
Yeah.
The Analog Designs black box, that's about $3,000 or so, and
that's just a saturator
and a transformer. It's two different types of transformers and some saturation. It also has I think an air control, which has a little bit of top end EQ.
Yeah.
So again, it's not exactly the same, but it's in that vein.
It's kind of like in the category of mix bus, master bus.
Yeah, saturation, transformer, a little bit of EQ, kind of a thing.
Mix finisher.
Where this one has a width control. I don't think the Neve Portico has a width, or maybe it does.
I believe it does. Yeah, but I don't think. I think it's just a one stage, wide, narrow to wide knob. I'd have to look it up again. But at the price range that thing's going for, I'm not in the market for that.
Yeah, that's expensive.
At this point, anyway.
All this stuff's expensive. So if you're in the market for something to throw on the master bus, and you want something that's kind of a good jack of all trades, can add a lot to a mix, that can add a little bit of color, a little bit of EQ, a little bit of saturation, a little bit of width, the Fusion is a good contender. It's something you may want to check out, especially if you're someone, and we get this question a lot, people that are just starting to get into hybrid. They don't have a console, but they just have their DAW, and they may have an interface that has a bunch of inputs and outputs. And they're like, what kind of gear should I get first? Where do you start with all this nonsense?
Yeah, there's a lot to start with. I mean, I know like my solution to that problem is I run on my master bus. I run either a Warm Audio API or a Warm Audio Neve preamp. And set your saturation and with that, and then I have the Warm Audio bus compressor. So that is my my mix bus processing hybrid style, and a lot of what this unit is giving you can get from that.
Same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, same kind of idea where it's giving you the transformers, it's giving you not a lot of tone of EQ. But it's giving you a definite EQ curve, and then the compressor is adding another transformer and your bus compression on it. So you throw a mix bus EQ on there and you're done. I mean, like it does a very good job. But if I was to want like a one-stop solution for that, I would go with this.
With the Fusion.
Yeah, I would go
It gives
with
you
that.
just enough, but not too much.
Yeah.
So yes, typically I tell people, if you're getting in the hybrid, if you're in the box and you just say, I want to get a piece of gear, my first piece of gear, what do I get? I always tell people, start on your master bus.
Yes.
Get something on the master bus, get a good bus compressor or a good master bus EQ or both, or maybe something like the Fusion because it has a little of everything. It doesn't have a fully featured compressor, but it has a high frequency compressor, which works. It has a saturation, it has the width, it has the EQ. So maybe if you got the Fusion and then maybe a decent stereo bus compressor, that's going to give you the most bang for the buck if you're just starting out with hybrid. That's what I tell everyone. And then work your way backwards.
Yeah.
Don't start with, well, let's get a compressor for our snare drum. That's cool and all, but that's not going to give you the overall effect. If you're starting off with hybrid and you're starting off with hardware, you want something that affects the entire mix. So start at the master bus, and the Fusion is a good choice. And it's, in the scheme of affordability for hardware, it's a high quality piece that's reasonably priced when you look at everything else that's on the market. And so there you go. So that is the SSL Fusion hardware, kind of a more of an in-depth look and getting two people's opinions on it. Come back for the next video where we'll compare it to the plugins, and then we'll talk through that and see what we hear in the room, one compared to the other. Again, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Make sure you check out all the links in the description box. We'll have all of Dave's links there as well. And that's it. And so until the next video, I've been Dave, and he's been Dave with Mixing Music Analog and mixingmusicanalog.com. Thanks so very much for watching. Let us know in the comments if you have a Fusion, if you like it, or what your thoughts are, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.